All right. Good morning and good day to wherever our listeners are today. We are excited to have in our studio Tammy Aguillon, who is a go-to-market leader with Google Workspace. Tammy has had a non-traditional career. She's a woman in tech and has been focused in sales for a very long time. Tammy and Igor, welcome and thanks for joining us. Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your journey? How did you get into tech and why sales?
Sure. And good to see you, Shiva and Igor. Thanks for having me today. So I would say it's a non-traditional career for me. Certainly wasn't something that I had thought about while I was, younger or even in college and thinking about what I wanted to do next. Straight out of college, I actually started in marketing only because at the time, 21, you think it seems fun. You get to travel, you get to be at events. And I did that for a few years and for various reasons, just sort of hit like a quarter life crisis of, is this really what I want to do long term? I'm not sure this is the right thing for me. It wasn't necessarily clear in my head that sales is the thing I wanted to do. I just knew that this wasn't a long term path for me. And so I ended up actually talking to quite a few of my old friends from college, from school, reaching out to my smallish network at the time and seeing like, what is everyone doing and do they like it? And seeing if that was something I wanted to pursue. Because I was in marketing, I worked very closely with sales organizations. A lot of it was in sales support and demand generation functions, but I worked very closely with sales organizations. And at the time, and this was many, many years ago, 17, 18 years ago, it was just not a field that I related to or identified with for multiple reasons. One is, I would say, just from what you perceive of what the role is and who should be in it or who typically is in those types of functions. There was no role model for me. And there was no sort of like archetype of somebody that I could look at and say, that's really cool what so-and-so is doing. That's something that I think I should do. If anything, I think working closely with those organizations, sales organizations at the time, made me feel like that's not the thing for me. I also don't like, talking about money. I don't like to, have this sort of like assertive, aggressive persona. That's just not who I am. But like I said, I started talking to a number of folks and actually a really good friend of mine, two of them actually suggested you should consider it because there are parts of your personality that I think would really lend themselves to it. And it was almost like I scoffed, quite honestly, at the time. Like it just did not seem like anything that I was remotely interested in. But what I did was I took a day and I shadowed a sales organization. Again, this is a good friend of mine who let me into their tech company. It was a SaaS startup and let me just sort of shadow the team. And I was fortunate enough to come into this company for a day and it was predominantly female and they got us done. I mean, it was like a very fast paced, very sort of like just extremely professional environment that I could really engage with and dig in. And, I was there kind of like as a somewhat silent observer, but I had a million questions after that day. And so I decided, and this was also coinciding with life stage too, right? And at that time, life stage wise, I was still kind of like early in many of my professional pursuits. And I decided, this could be something that I could try. I could try it for a year, dip my toe in, see how it goes. Risk profile was fairly high and I had more tolerance at the time. So let's try this. And so I became an SDR, or for those that aren't familiar, sales development representative, or BDR, business development representative, which is an entry-level sales role, right? You are picking up the phone, taking inbound calls from companies who are inquiring about yours, or you are making cold dials to others. And I sat in a startup, I was employee number 150, at a buffet table because there was not enough actual desks for us. And at the time, we didn't have any like sort of like fancy outreach or sales lock cadence programs. It was just Salesforce and Outlook and a desk phone. Those were my tools. And that just sort of kickstarted the whole journey.
Wow. That's quite impressive. Especially, I enjoyed hearing some of the topics that I was thinking about as we were talking about this podcast. Sales traditionally it's such a taboo for women to enter, right? It's just like, oh, you're too soft for this. And as we'll talk about it in depth, I think there's so much to learn. So letting a little secret out, I am a customer of Tammy's and I've seen her effectiveness in action. What a joy it was to see a woman on the other side leading with so much courage and charm and finding those win-win solutions that benefit organizations. So I truly think that women should take inspiration from you, Tammy, and actively consider sales as a career because there is just so much goodness that we bring to the table in that field. I remember you talking about it, right? Like we all are actually selling at some point. You want to talk a little bit about that? I thought that was a very interesting thought.
Yeah, that's exactly the right way to think about it, Shivam. I mean, regardless of whether or not you have sales or anything customer facing attached to your title or to your role or to your function, the reality is we're all in sales at some point or at some part of our day or at some part of our career. And what I mean by that is you could be preparing for your next interview, in which case you are selling yourself. You are in a situation where maybe you have an idea or an initiative that you're launching and you need to get cross functional buy-in and consensus. You are selling that, right? And I know, again, it's sort of like a somewhat of a taboo where people don't like to think about it that way, but it really doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? The other way that I've always thought about it and I've always approached it is it is a way, said another way, it is a project management and solutioning role. Again, depends on if you could be in an interview, you could be in a situation where you might be raising funding, even if you're a founder, or like I said, launching a brand new initiative within your company. There are so many ways in which we're selling, and even in our personal lives as well, too, right? Like if you
Very
are
true.
trying to negotiate something with a banker, or if you are at the DMV and trying to just do something fairly bureaucratic and simple, like there is an element of persuasion that is happening all the time.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, absolutely. And that element of persuasion is actually might be really important in many areas of our lives. And going back to your career development, what actually struck me, and I think what is really interesting, that you went through two big tech acquisitions in your careers. And I think it's quite remarkable to go through one, because not many people have a chance to do it, but you went through two, and one was in 2013. The company you were working for was acquired by Oracle, and another one in 2016 when Microsoft was very active in acquiring startups. It acquired the startup you were working for, and also it acquired LinkedIn in 2016. I think it's quite an interesting experience going through an acquisition by big tech. So can you tell us a little bit what was it like, and how did you adapt to that new culture going from startup to big tech?
Yeah, definitely. Those were, I would say, very transformative periods of my career. And I like sort of think about my career in different eras. And during that era, to your point, Igor, I had joined two startups. One was Responses, that was the Oracle acquisition. And Responses had been through its own transformation. We had actually gone public first. And so, as far as I knew, we were going to be a public company. And so we were working towards profitability, getting operational processes more in line and more standardized. And then the acquisition came about 2 years after we were public. So it was highly unexpected. And then on the Xamarin side, slightly different bent. Xamarin was a very high flying startup. I mean, at the time that I was there, the growth that we were experiencing was insane. It was it was the whole triple, triple, double, double standard that you want to see in a lot of startups. And so there was a lot of days where it was like a fly by the seat of your pants sort of thing, not a lot of standardized processes. And so when you get absorbed like into an organization like Microsoft, a lot of that, the culture is up to the folks within these startups and these companies to still remain. And you have to sort of, as a leader, be able to guide and lead and through a lot of that change management, while you yourself don't always know what's going to be happening. But it can be a bit of a shock, right? Going from that sort of high flying, high growth environment, then getting absorbed by not just any tech company, but like the two biggest tech companies at the time, and being a small division within that company. All right. And I think what I found during both those periods were that, the plus sides of it is that you sort of become a little bit of like the cool kid, because you are the new shiny new object within these larger organizations. And those folks are very eager to learn about your solution. They are eager to certainly sell your solution. They are eager to integrate and to start talking to customers about your solution. So there's a plus side of that. There is also, the benefit, I think, for an employee being absorbed in that situation is you get to learn what it means to be in a highly matrixed organization and to have and yield influence where you may not necessarily have the title or the org. And that, I think, never would have imagined this now, but that has really helped me even now in my role at Google, and understanding, right? Sort of come full circle. Certainly didn't plan it that way, But those two experiences helped immensely into going into Google and understanding what I was coming into and the environment that I would have to be prepared for, which is going to be different than a startup. So I would say, like, again, not by choice, but extremely glad and grateful that those experiences did happen.
It's very interesting, and you mentioned getting and finding yourself in a new environment, and I think in most cases people see acquisitions as a happy moment. Some people make a lot of money. You have new opportunities. Because you were inside those situations when the company you were working for got acquired. Can you tell us, are there any misconceptions people usually have about acquisitions that we normally don't see, but maybe you experienced in your career?
I do, and I think now in 2025, we are seeing a different pace of acquisitions. Well, and I would even say even this year, it's picked up more than it has in the past, 2 or 3 or so. There is a concept, there is a myth, and, there could be truth to it in certain situations where it's just this huge liquidity event for everybody. The reality is these days, it really depends on if you have picked the right company and they're also negotiated the right compensation for you. So, you mentioned having it be a very big liquidity event. That can be true. You have to have made sure that you put yourself in a position to be able to do that. I would also say that sometimes people feel like there's a huge mindset of fear when you are the one being acquired, right? Which is like, what's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to my function? I experienced both of those amongst my team during the Responses and the Xamarin acquisition. And a lot of it, you just sort of have to put your head down and see yourself through the process and make sure that you are maintaining your rhythm and your pace throughout these acquisitions. What you don't want to do is start, sort of like flailing, underperforming, getting into this like victim mindset, right? The whole thing is to keep your head down and to keep persisting throughout the acquisition. Yes, there will be changes, but they are entirely out of your control, right? There are conversations that are happening that have been set. There is some control that you can exert, which is how you think about entering into this new company and being open and curious about the new experiences that it could open up for you and any potential professional achievements you could unlock that you may not have been able to do previously in a smaller company.
Yeah, that's we were talking about non-traditional, and I think it's not just the element of sales, but actually sales. A woman in sales and startup. That's quite the triple whammy. So let's talk a little bit about that. I have friends who are kind of bored of the big tech and they are looking for greener pastures. And these are interesting times to be looking for greener pastures, to be honest. And I've constantly, just like Igor coaches me, I coach others and say, yeah, is this a really right time for you to take those big, bold bets? But there's a constant theme that comes up, especially with women with families, young kids, the parental responsibilities are climbing on them, saying, is this the right time for me? I would love to flavor a startup, but is this the right time for me? Talk to me a little bit about the right timing. I think you referred to the 3 phases of your career. I think a lot of people would like to hear more about what those phases were and what is that divine timing that we are talking about here, where where you can actually take the plunge. Talk to us a little bit about that.
This is a big topic, I would say, and I think it's highly personal, right? Highly personal, and I will speak from my point of view and my experience, and to your point, Shrivan, what I've seen in my network and my circle as well. But it is something you're professional, and again, if you are or have a family or are looking to start a family, these are all considerations that the reality is we have to take those into considerations when we are at least I do when I think about my professional journey as well, right? They're inextricably entwined, no matter how I like to separate and compartmentalize them. And I would say, and I'll just kind of put these into different buckets. There's do I go into a startup or big tech? And then there is the separate thing of, is it the right timing for me relative to whatever is happening at my life stage? And I would say, and again, times are continuing to evolve, times are continuing to change. I would say, these days, and this is my personal experience, is that startup versus big tech, there's no one right versus the other. It really truly is, what is it that you are looking to achieve now, but also is it going to get you to this next career milestone that you're looking to achieve? In a startup, you will likely have bigger scope, bigger team, more OKRs to be responsible for, right? If you are in a leadership role. And the same thing applies if you are in an IC role as well. If you are in a big tech company, you will be in a bit of a tighter swim lane, but you will get very deep subject matter expertise in that swim lane. That's been my experience, right? Is like you will still get the opportunity, and that's sort of intentionally. I have intentionally stereotyped the two a little bit just to sort of put a little bit of some classification around the two. Of course, in a big tech company, you will still get the opportunity to be able to expand your wings, to be able to do stretch projects, and to be able to wear multiple hats. But the nature of your everyday day-to-day operations and focus is going to be more specialized in a big tech company versus a startup. That's again, and so it's more about, is that what are you interested in? And then does it match up with your life stage? Now, I do have 2 young children. For me, and they're probably not that young anymore. They're approaching their elementary and middle school age, but I had them when I was in startups. Like I had both kids when I was in startup environments, pre-COVID, going into the office every single day. So it can be done. Will you have quote unquote this, utopian balance that everybody refers to? Not every day. No, not every day. There were just things that will be off balance day to day. But overall, it's on you to establish your boundaries and to figure out what works for you. So that's my take. Is I don't think it's like when your kids are this age, you should be in a startup. When your kids are this age, you should be, like it's going to be highly subjective, dependent for everybody.
Very well said. Very well said. And it's such a personal decision, as you said. It's what are you seeking in that stage of life, and what are the opportunities in front of you. I mean, sometimes you might be so certain of being in big tech, and from the left field comes an idea, and you're like, "Wow, I don't want to miss this opportunity," and you shouldn't.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
And it goes into negotiating your boundaries, right? And that's the conversation you have with your spouses and the village that helps you raise your families around you, and say, is this something we have support for? Can we try that? This happened actually in the reverse with my husband, because he was at Google for a very long time. In fact, we were at Google together for a few years as well. And there came an opportunity and he's like, can we do this? My daughter was 2.5 at that point. And my first reaction was, of course not. It's exactly when you should be at Google, because you've just had a kid and you have a more balanced life. And we took a decision as a family that if he doesn't do it now, it might be late for him to actually know what else is out there and to keep himself fresh. It was the right decision for us as a family for him to explore. Okay, this is a great segue into another topic that I saw in your resume and your trajectory. Is you started to manage people pretty quickly as well, and transitioned from being an individual contributor to being a leader. How did that transition manifest for you? Was it a calling, or was it a necessity? Do you think the startup world accelerated that path for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Lots to unpack there. So yes, I firmly believe now in hindsight that being at a startup at that time accelerated that transition. And that's where I think, sometimes you can experience leaps and bounds in your career progression being in a smaller company and getting access sooner. I would also say I had a tremendous mentor at the time, and that's a big part of my journey as well. And that's been a continued thread throughout my journey as well. But at the time, there was no sort of plan at the time to move into any sort of leadership role. In fact, I had just been an IC for 2 years. First as I mentioned, an SDR, and then second as an account executive or sales representative, an AE, and things were going great. I was loving my career transition from marketing into sales. I was so happy to have made that decision, was really starting to build up pipeline, build a reputation, build credibility, and start to establish my own closing patterns and my own rhythms. And things were great. Personally, my husband and I had just gotten married. And so we were sort of like still in that newlywed stage. Like everything was fine. And I did get tapped, right? My mentor at the time, who was also my manager, said, look, we have an opening here. I'd really like you to consider it. I actually, and I know this doesn't happen all the time. It's sort of like this like fairy godmother tipping you with their wand. But I actually had some doubts. I said, I don't know if I want to do that. Like right now, I really enjoy controlling my own destiny, having my own sort of command over my day to day, I don't know if I want to do that. And that's, that's I think the power of somebody else who believes in you and sees something that you may not see. And also just sort of like giving you a little bit of a nudge. And then what I ended up doing is I sort of, as I do with most things, is I talk to other folks that I really respected who were already in a sales leadership role and had already made that transition to see, what their experience was like. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to interview for this and let's see let's see where this goes. I'm not going to be so attached to the outcome. But what I found was in that process of learning about a leadership role, talking to people, and actually preparing and going through the interview process, I wanted it. I wanted it. And I
Wow.
found myself actually going through it and saying, you know what? I do want to do this and I do want this. And now I'm 100% in. And so I fully threw myself into the interview process, fingers crossed, ended up getting it. And I've never looked back. It's been one of the, I would just say, obviously going into the sales career and function and then moving into leadership. And I've had leadership roles and levels throughout the startups and the companies that I've been at. It's been incredibly rewarding.
This sounds really amazing. And it's really interesting that you mentioned a couple of different support systems that you had. And one of the things I heard was having a mentor. And I would like to dive into that subject and talk about it a little bit. So our audience is very diverse. Some of the people are more senior and are higher in their careers, and some of our audiences are just starting out. And to have a mentor might give you a really huge advantage in your career. From your experience, do you think there is a way for a transition of that relationship of being just a manager and employee into mentorship relationship? Is it something that you can do intentionally, or is it something that just has to happen?
Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned, mentorship, sponsorship, advocacy, that's been a big part of my career in different ways. And I do see it as sort of a spectrum, right? And I learned this from a CHRO that I previously worked with at DocuSign. The way she described it is a mentor it can, and I've always treated it as something both formal and informal. So I do have my own informal mentors. But I do have, even now at this point in my career, I mentor others, but even I have a mentor that I still connect with on a quarterly basis as well. And so the way I think about it is like a mentor is somebody that you can talk to, is a sounding board, can help guide, nudge you, give you ideas that you haven't thought about, can help you with something that you might be working through or learning about in your present role, and encourage you to think about future roles. A sponsor or an advocate is somebody that can actually speak up on your behalf. And a sponsor or an advocate is somebody that is within your company, is more senior than you, and has enough influence to be able to speak on your behalf. That is an earned relationship, because if that person is going to be speaking on your behalf, nominating you potentially for stretch roles or for stretch projects, they're putting their own credibility on the line by doing that. And so in my eyes, a mentor is somebody that you can have a formal relationship with. You could ask, like, people will come ask me, Tammy, I'd like you to be my mentor. Would you be open to that? This is how it would work. And I've done that with my mentor. I would say on the sponsor side, that is very much an earned spot. You could ask for it, but you shouldn't expect that it will necessarily be reciprocated. And so those are much harder to find, a sponsor and an advocate. And a lot of that speaks to the work that you do, how you show up, and also your ability to be able to ask and advocate for yourself to somebody more senior.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing it. And I love that you also mentor people, but you were mentored by your colleagues in the past. So one question I wanted to ask you regarding this topic is about relationships with mentorships and with mentors and with sponsors. So sometimes it feels like people take those relationships for granted and don't value it enough. And sometimes it's like a credit of trust that mentor gives you, but it's also relatively easy to exhaust that credit and to basically destroy the relationship. What, in your opinion, are the most common mistakes people make in relationships with mentors or
Yeah,
sponsors?
such a great way to frame that, Igor. So I would say the best mentor-mentee relationships that I've had, the person asking for it will come to me and say, this is what I particularly am interested in and where I think you could help me, right? They know or have some idea or some perception of what I've done and what my career has been. And there's something in there that is either intriguing or something that they want to pursue. So here's how it'll look. It's not going to be like a forever thing. It'll be, can we meet monthly for the next 4 months? This is my focus area for the next 4 to 6 months. And so would you be open to it? So there's a established rhythm. There is an agenda or outcome of what they're trying to achieve with me. And then each time we meet, they bring me agenda items, right? There's like a bulleted list of things they want to talk through during that specific session. So treat it like you would any other valuable one-on-one that you might have with a team member. Come prepared, come with ideas, and have bulletized agenda items that you want to discuss. And the other thing I'll say is I value those mentee relationships because just as much as they feel like, oh, Tammy, I want to learn about this, or I get a lot of value about having those conversations as well, right? I get to understand what is it that people are struggling with, and I get to sort of put my own self into somebody else's shoes and like, well, maybe I haven't approached exactly that, but let's talk through how I might approach that. And so it's almost like this, like I said, this fun problem solving thing that I get to be exposed to as well. And we all know it feels good to be able to help and support people, especially, as I shared earlier, what my own journey was and how this was not nearly on my radar. I want to see more folks getting into this function, being successful in it, and also start to progress their careers.
A few weeks ago, we had an all team where, the whole organization comes together, talks about the pertinent topics. What is our portfolio looking like? And so each leader goes up, talks about their portfolio. And, it's an audience of 100, 120 odd people. What I was observing after that event was over is how different is the concept of mentoring and coaching for the new generation, right? The generation after us in some respects, but it's they're so aware. They're so self-aware. They are so articulate in asking specifically for what they want or appreciating a specific skill. I remember when I was their age, if there was an all team like this and a leader went up and talked about something which was great, I would just go back in my trenches. I wouldn't have the courage to go up and say, you were amazing. When I heard that, one of the junior talents came up and was sharing, she's like, I could feel every emotion that you were showing up there. Kudos to the next generation. I think they are really clear about what are they seeking, and it was very specific. And she's like, the messaging that you communicated was very clear, and I would like to learn that. I'd like to learn that better. I was like, wow, that's amazing. You're not giving me a blanket statement of
Right.
I want to be your mentee. I'm saying I want to learn from your communication skills.
It's a great example. I'm with you, Shivam. Same thing, as I would just sort of like retreat back into my cubicle after big events like that and just sort of digest it on my own instead of being vocal about it.
Yeah, kudos to them. Kudos to them. I have to mention this thing about coaches because there's a quote that I use a lot. I think it will resonate with people. It's a plugin for a book that was written by a bunch of Googlers, actually, Tammy. Bill Underwood, who used to coach Eric Schmidt and the Google founders, they say the coach is someone who tells you what you don't want to hear, who has you see what you don't want to see, so you can be who you have always known you could be.
I love that.
It was so profound. It was so profound. My relationship with my coaches changed that day. I was like, if they're just telling me all the good things I'm doing, then they're not my coaches.
Yeah. Yeah, right. You don't want pats on the back. We all need to know the cold hard truth sometimes.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about another cold hard truth about sales and women. We'll do some myth busting here. That's usually my favorite part of the episode where we talk about some provocative things. So the reality is that you don't see many women on the other side of the table when you're on the negotiation floors. And it's just become the state of the union for that, for that matter. Where do you see this society in terms of how it accepts that? I love it. I will just start by saying that. I think I was sharing with a few of you that in my role, I deal with a lot of procurement for software products for NVIDIA. And as part of that, I'm seeing an increasing number of women on the other side of the table. And I enjoy that. I welcome that because the vibe is just completely different. But Tammy, you're living it, breathing that world. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean it's a big topic. Like I said in the beginning, even before jumping into the world of sales and thinking about it as a serious career, like the other thing I'll say that I should have mentioned in the beginning too is my parents are immigrants, so I'm a first generation American. My parents come from like very big STEM backgrounds. My mother was a pharmacist. My dad was a hardware engineer. And so very sort of like STEM, like in their eyes, I was going to be an accountant or a doctor or a lawyer, just sort of like typical immigrant, paths of what your child was going to do. Like, and even as I was approaching like maybe this career pivot that I was thinking through at the time, they were like, we don't know a thing about what it is that is that isn't something that we can help you with. And I said, I get it, but I feel like this is something I just have to do. So there was even just that moment, because to your point, Shivam, even if you are a woman, and if you are a woman of color that comes from a more traditional family background, just even thinking about it and getting that impetus to start could be challenging. And so I wanted to share that story because I think it's like, if you feel like it could be something worth trying or experimenting with, even if it hasn't been something that's been considered, go for it. And then I would also say, as I've moved throughout my career, it's the representation for women and for women in color in sales leadership is even narrower, right? If it was narrow when I was an AE, a bag carrying IE as an IC, it is even more so now. And before, I think, earlier in my career, I used to feel sort of like a chip on my shoulder that like I had to prove something. And I think, all salespeople do, but also that I had to reinvent myself into something else that I observed, right? That there was a lot of that I went through, and finding my own leadership style and finding my own communication style and how I would, work with my teams and lead my teams. And I always felt like it had to be like somebody else, because that's what a true sales leader looks like. But over time, through working through many different environments and being agile, I've completely shed that. There are still aspects of where I admire other people, but it's not because I feel like, I have to be that or I won't be successful. It's just like they're doing something really interesting, and that would be an interesting practice for me to bring in too, like just sort of like, sort of normal benchmarking and best practices, if you will. But that is, I think that's quite honestly a topic that a lot of mentees approach me with, which is, how are you, quote unquote, so confident in your communication? How do you run your business in this way? I feel like I have to really overly adapt and be inauthentic like other members on my team who are predominantly male dominated industries or functions. And so that's been a really big learning for me as I've gone through my own journey and my own path too, is finding my own voice and just knowing that I can be that. And it's worked. I will also say that you sort of have to, at some point, this is what it is. There's no point in trying to sort of like call anything out or feel less than. It is what it is. And the reality is my professional network is predominantly men.
Yeah.
And
I was going to say that.
It's fine. And I actually am very good friends with them. We've known each other, many of them. I've known them for years, and we've gone through many different life stages as we've all gotten married, had kids, moved through professional journeys ourselves. And for me, that's my diversity, right? Is because I get to hear what they think about too. And it's not that different, if I'm being honest. In certain cases it is, but and I've leaned into that, right? And I've really leaned into that. And so it's sort of about getting comfortable with it. But that is also a big part of why I think even just having or seeing somebody that can be in a certain role that you might aspire, or maybe just not even aspire, just considering, is incredibly valuable. I didn't have that, but I am eager to be that for others.
That's very powerful.
And also very interesting part about confidence in communication. We have a lot of interesting questions about how AI is impacting sales. But before we dive into that section of our episode today, I wanted to talk just a little bit about confidence. I remember you mentioned in the very beginning that when you first heard about this opportunity to go into sales, you had some hesitations. You were not totally comfortable talking about money and going into those conversations. But when you initiated the process, you felt that you actually wanted to do it, and it gave you an extra energy, an extra push to pursue it. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal transformation and about becoming more confident, specifically for those people who look at you as a role model and in a way want to be as confident as you are today? What helped you make that transformation and gain more confidence?
Yeah. This is such a great topic. And, the reality is, I would say on a personal front, I am an introvert, maybe more of an ambivert. I can sort of go back and forth, but I would say my true nature is an introvert. It takes a lot for me to sort of, put myself out there and to, go to networking events, go to dinners and sort of thing. But that's not to be, and I would say on the confidence front, what I tell people is that's not to be confused with, say, certainty. I think, yes, I have a certain amount of self assuredness and confidence in myself. That doesn't mean I have 100% certainty about everything. Like, that's where you have to sort of leave room. And you have to, especially in this transformation period that we're all going through, but you have to leave room to not be certain about everything. I have built that confidence over the years for myself. Does it ever waver? Of course, because your ability and your knowledge on certain things are always going to be different. And so I don't see it as this like steady state thing that's always here. I see it as like, this is going to be an up and down thing, but I've learned to be okay with that. And I've learned to live with that it's okay when I don't know the answer to everything or when I don't have certainty or clarity on everything. And I think that's the nuance when it comes to confidence. And then, not to segue overly into AI because we always have to talk about it, but I do think these sorts of soft skills are going to be the ones that are going to be really critical as we move into certain skills being commoditized by AI. And I'm still learning it myself. I am experimenting, and yes, I'm in an environment within Google where I have access to a lot of these great tools and strategies, and can learn from some of the folks, from some of the leaders in this space. But the reality is we are all learning this together. And so, but I do think that elements like critical thinking, reasoning, communications, ability to persuade, those are all things that we can hold innately and work on, even in the age of AI.
What a beautiful thought. And yes, so things that are possible to be done by humans are becoming more valuable when things that can be commoditized are being replaced by AI. And it's a great chance to segue into the AI conversation. So we have very interesting statistical data. Over 30% of sales related tasks are now today automated by AI. One. Second is that 43% of salespeople use AI daily today in 2025. And there is a forecast, and some researchers suggest that up to 67% of sales representatives' tasks could be replaced by AI in a relatively close future. So, can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on AI and how it might impact sales?
Yeah. I've thought about this quite a bit. It's all over my LinkedIn feed. This is pretty much like, this is what my feed is made up of every single day. So I absorb a lot too from the pundits and from all the LinkedIn influencers. Everybody's got a hot take on what the state of sales is going to look like in the age of AI. Look, my personal opinion is sales, we need a product. We need to have a product to sell. And so for me, it's linked to the product. And what I see happening, or what I see potentially happening, is products themselves, as they become more AI focused and AI centric, that will change the nature of the sales motion that's required. There will be products that basically can be more self-serve and self-onboarded by customers. That's what I see. That will change what type of sales motion is required. And when I say sales motion, I mean, as a buyer, I could buy online by swiping a credit card, whereas before I may have to talk to a human, right? And so that might happen for more complex, quote unquote, enterprise motions. I think you will always need to have some sort of person in there. But even then, are you always going to need to have someone to come in and do a demo? Or could maybe at some point you have a demo from an AI something avatar, and they could even address questions real time with you instead of getting a human to come on and do a demo with you. Contract terms and negotiation. Like, could an AI representatives support with that instead of a human as well. Right. So I think there are going to be certain, yes, to your point, Igor, there are going to be certain parts of the motion that will be supported and augmented by I. Do I think they're going to be entirely replaced? I don't know. Who knows? Even like 5 years from now, the jiu-jitsu change we've seen in the last 2 years has been staggering. So who knows? But at least that's sort of like what's forming in my mind for the next at least 18 to 24 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
That's very spot on in terms of the product-led growth that is going to change the cycles of sales. You're very, very, very true. One of the things it'd be amiss if I don't mention, and that I'm noticing, is how there's certain advantage for women in sales to be leveraging AI. And this is not something I'm trying to fit into the equation. I'll give you an example of this. We were talking to somebody, a major AI player in the space, and I could easily see how the sales executive on the other side just left the note taking to AI and said, well, I'll get the notes from there. Let's just focus on the value conversation.
Yes.
And that was refreshing. Instead of you feeling like you are being every word you say, every clause you're saying is going to be recorded and you're going to be quoted. And it just was a very uncomfortable dialogue. It was a very natural conversation about value that this product is going to deliver for the company and the value that we need to co-create as two companies, and very little about the tactics of like, is this a net 30 or a net 60 or, we didn't have to go there. And given the soft skill disposition that women in general come with, I've often observed that the sales cycles are all about value discussions when we have women on the other side versus the nickel and dime conversations, which sometimes happens where, folks will be like, well, I cannot go below 4.7. And you just go like, it's not about the 4.7.
Yeah.
It's actually about give me the value that I can find in that 300K delta that you're showing me. And it's, like I said, this past year has been phenomenal in terms of the number of women I've seen on the other side and how they are leveraging AI to make their lives easier. And they value that it's about, at the end of the day, sales is about the human connection. And if AI has to succeed, the human connection has to precede that.
Yes. And excellent point. I do believe that sales is a human connection. Otherwise we would, I believe, it's not all just about the relationship, but that's a huge part of it. It's the trust and credibility that's built, right? And
Very
so
true.
that's hard to build with AI, at least currently at the moment. I would also say that that example that you gave, Shivam, is perfect. That even for me has taken just a lot of energy off of, is this person capturing all the notes? Am I capturing all the notes correctly? Am I interpreting this right? Like I can just sort of liberate myself from that, and I can truly focus. I can truly focus on active listening.
Very true. Very true. Well, unfortunately, we're coming to a close here on this amazing conversation. We talked about such a diversity of topics, which is always fun because we think of tech to be this very software engineering, cold, hard facts conversation. But here we are talking about literally everything under the sun that goes into not just building products, but taking them to market and then getting them into the hands of the users. Tammy, this is a very volatile world we're living in. As we speak, I'm sure there is a new update on New York Times on what's happening in different parts of the world. As you're in an industry which is so impacted by this, right, in so many ways, how do you keep your sanity? And what are some tips and tricks that you can share with our users and our listeners about how to keep your sanity, and what do you anchor in when the world around you is teetering on the edges?
Yeah, this is kind of a big part of who I am, Shivam, because of the nature of what I do. And, I measure my life because of the nature of what I do in quarters. That's kind of where we are these days. And yes, and, the added impact of what's, the state of the world now. I would say there was sort of like three major, moments in my own personal life, that have really helped me figure out what routines and sanity checks I need. I would say one is being a mother and the transition into being a mother. The second is COVID, when the world got locked down. And through those two significant life events, I actually sort of like created and established a lot of routines for myself. And these did not come overnight, but at this point, I have a pretty established rhythm of how I run my day. And those also help me then run my business. And so from like my own personal, again, these are like highly personal things that people need to establish for themselves, and not everything is for everybody. But I do have a very early morning wake up call that I set up for myself. It can be anywhere between 5 to 5:30, 5:45 if I'm sleeping in. But that time in the morning is for me. It is entirely, it's quiet in the house. I will often, it's usually something movement related. So it's almost always a workout. And it doesn't matter if it's a weekend, it doesn't matter if it's a weekday, I'm up early. And that for me sets the tone for the rest of the day. It's because I've already done the hard thing, and because I've already sort of like uh, gotten my energy out in my body. And so the rest, like that sort of sets the tone for my mental state the rest of the day. And I can
Wow.
focus on what it is that I need to do. So
Great, great. Yes, the 5 a.m. club, as they say. All right. So, any podcasts or books that you recommend for our listeners?
yeah, I'm very boring when it comes to books. I like reading nonfiction. I know I need to read more fiction, but I don't necessarily read business books. I like reading a lot of sort of like, the obstacle is the way is my favorite book. I like reading sort of like mindset. This is more about health and everything, but it's called The Mind Gut Connection. That is an active read that I have on my nightstand right now. So I like reading about a lot about wellness and health, and mindset sort of books. I would say from a podcast standpoint, I really like Diary of a CEO. That's the one I've currently been into. I like to sort of listen to things that are inspirational and aspirational. And so Diary of a CEO is one that I really enjoy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been such a ride, just learning about how to be in an industry which is so typecasted, and being what somebody would say an anomaly, and making such a fantastic career out of it. Congratulations on your journey so far, Tammy. I'm pretty sure you have a long runway ahead of you. We'll be hearing a lot more about all the cool things you do and all the myths that you bust as this industry takes shape. And good luck to you as the AI revolution takes on and reforms how sales is done in tech or beyond.
Yeah. It was
Thank
a pleasure.
you so much.
Thank you, Shivam. Thank you, Igor.